from a pediatric specific point of view. How many people here, just asking, how many people here are already thinking they can see themselves in some aspect of pediatrics, whether it's a subspecialty or general peds? That's pretty awesome. What kind of are you guys interested? General peds initially and then a subspecialty? What are you guys thinking that are pretty sure that's what you want to do?
I like
General?
I like Pete's poem.
Peds poem? Okay, all right. Anybody else want to? Huh?
Peds oncology.
Peds onc. You know, I'm working on a pediatric oncology rotation right now, and that is, they are at Children's, which is considered OUHSC stomping grounds, but for some of these subspecialties, we have a very tread lightly affiliation agreement with them. So I'll be talking with Dr. Pocala, I don't remember how he emphasizes his name, on Monday and seeing if he wants to sign one up. And quite frankly, I'm going to talk with Paul's oncologist if anybody's interested in adult oncology, because she's pretty awesome too. So, but I might wait a little bit to do that. I'd hate to run into one of those appointments that would like to stop. Okay, so no offense, but it would. Okay, so here we go. Behavioral medicine from a pediatric point of view. I bet if I turn this around and point it the right way, it works better. Okay, so my objectives are kind of vague and a little, you know, the ARC requires us to have objectives. Dr. Latassi's objectives are like nirvana objectives. I wish I would aspire to write those. But basically what you need to understand are the big six of everything. The basic physiology of every clin medicine topic presented, the basic pathophysiology, how that clinical medicine topic presents in the clinic, what are you likely to see when a patient comes in with a certain disorder, what is your differential diagnosis for a certain presentation, how do you approach it diagnostically, and the treatment plans. Those are the big six. I spend a lot of time, and for you guys to get objectives like this, you're thinking to yourself, man, that's bogus, that's a bunch of hoo-ha. But what I do and what some of the other professors do is kind of help you during this didactic phase of your education balance between having stuff given to you and ferreting out the information that you need to know. Because once you get to the clinical phase, and I know you're hearing this from your upperclassmen, it's self-study. And when I get these students in that are not doing well and they come and they sit down with me and they, oh, I just don't understand. And I said, man, you got to know the big six. Just know the big six. You know, so if you understand that basic principle, the big six on everything, then you're going to do well in the clinical phase when it's all self-study. Okay? So that's my objectives. Okay, let's start out with child abuse. Physical abuse is an act inflicted upon a child or youth by a parent or some other caregiver resulting in mucocutaneous, which means bruising, musculoskeletal, visceral, soft tissue wounds to the abdomen or intracranial tissue or death. Although a medical diagnosis, physical abuse is also defined legally in state statutes, no federal statutes, but state statutes. Approximately 10 per 1,000 children per year. Wow. So you go to an elementary school, you go to 2 different elementary schools with 500 students at each school, there's probably 5 at each school that are physically abused. There's no socioeconomic predetermination. It can happen to the wealthiest and to the poorest. It can happen at any race, and it can happen at any ethnicity. Although there are some increased risk factors. If your child is a holy hellion brat, they're at an increased risk factor for abuse. And speaking as a parent, that's just straight up frustration. Okay, there's a parental, or if there's if a parent has a history of child abuse when they were a child, or if there's substance abuse in the home, or parental might have like depression or schizophrenia, something like that. Different forms of abuse. There's physical abuse, which can be seen. There's sexual abuse, which often cannot be seen. There's emotional abuse, which covers everything from bullying to, you know, kinds of emotional abuse, geez, I wished I'd never had you, that kind of thing. And then there's also the abuse of neglect, okay? So when do you think about child maltreatment? When do you think about that? If the history, a 6-year-old comes into your urgent care with the sprained wrist, and the 6-year-old and the mother that presents with the 6-year-old don't have the same story or vastly different stories. If there are sudden changes, if you got a patient that you know pretty well, or, I mean, this doesn't apply to you, but teachers can often spot this. They've got a kid in their class that's outgoing and, you know, kind of one of the leaders, one of the alpha people in their class suddenly becomes withdrawn. You know, sudden changes in personality can indicate abuse. And that, the personality changes, that they can especially indicate abuse, but not necessarily from a caregiver. My kid's partner, one of my kid's partners is a teacher at one of the local magnet schools, you know, and we've talked about being on the lookout for the 8th grade student that suddenly withdraws, changes in temperament. That could indicate that they're being emotionally abused by a bully on campus. They have sexualized play, which is age inappropriate, okay, so wow, I could get really graphic, but I know you guys can know what I'm talking about. And it's more than just my 7-month-old Jackson, you know, Great Pyrenees puppy humping Gypsy's face every time he turns around. I'm sorry, Gypsy is just like, I'm over this, Jackson, leave me alone. And if he wasn't a 7-month, if he was doing that as a 1-month-old, what am I talking about? I'm extrapolating, but you see what I'm trying to say, right? Kids learn words, parents teach kids words. That's not the same thing as sexualized play, okay, and acting out. And this can also come from, and personally, in my opinion, I think letting your 3-year-old watch Natural Born Killers might be a form of abuse, although I think I would get some pushback from people, but, you know, there's certain things that kids shouldn't know. Do you know what I mean? So when they know too much for their age, then that can indicate a history of sexual abuse. Also, sleep disturbances, appetite changes, and enuresis, starting to wet the bed after they haven't been wet in the bed, or poop in their pants when they haven't been pooping their pants. All right, as clinicians, you guys are mandatory reporters. Tell me what that phrase means. I know you had this. I know you talked. Did you talk about this in behavioral health? Briefly, yes, no, that was not committal. Yeah, a little bit, okay, yeah, because Dr. Britton knew that I covered it pretty well in my PEDS course. So tell me what a mandatory reporter is.
Required to report child abuse if you see it.
Yep, that's right. You are a mandatory reporter. If you suspect it, you're required to report, you know, your suspicions of abuse. That's a good thing. That's a very good thing. If you suspect sexual abuse, don't do yourself. Call 405-271-KIDS. Children's Hospital has an entire team that will come into a 4-year-old's or a 5-year-old's world and do an exam thing, and it's pretty impressive, and the child only has to relive it one time, okay? And for you to try to do an exam can be just as traumatic to the child. Does that make sense? Where I kind of walk a line. A lot of times we've got the after the weekend with dad, and there's a custody battle and stuff going on. You know, you got to kind of know your patients, know their parents. You know, if you see it in the ER, and you know, if you see something in the ER, a 3-year-old with bruising to the labia, and mom says, my child just got back from a weekend at dad's, well, that's a whole lot different than the kid that comes into your clinic on Tuesday and mom says, my 3-year-old's touching herself since she got back from dad's. I think there's something going on. In that case, you know, in the first case, bruising on the labia, something like that, you're going to be a mandatory reporter there. On this case, you're going to, of course, you know, you got your flag, you got a red flag, you got a little tick in the back of your head, but you're going to talk with mom and say, you know, this can be normal behavior for this age. Don't poo-poo her, and then tell mom, give mom this number, and let her make that call. And once she gets explained to her what all's involved, usually they back off pretty quick if it's just a custody thing. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. You make your reports to the Department of Human Services Child Abuse and Neglect Hotline. There's an 800 number there. It's supposed to be anonymous. That doesn't mean all social workers are fabulous. I had a family come into my emergency room. It was a young single mom with 4 kids, 2 of them school age, 2 of them with me. And she was there for the youngest kid had an ear infection, something like that. It was no big deal. Certainly wasn't an emergency, but you know, whatever. Emergency is in the eye of the beholder, right? So we're okay with that. So I'm treating this kid, and I noticed this kid's got little round burns. This is the youngest of the 2. The older one, the other kid with her, also has similar lesions. You know, so I'm like, oh, hey, you know, what's going on here? And she tries to pass them off as ringworms. And they're clearly not ringworms, so I step out, talk to my nurse. I'm terrified that I'm going to destroy a family. I'm going to put kids in a, so I talk to my ER nurse who's very experienced. If you work in an ER and you've got a very experienced ER nurse, you are 3 steps ahead of everybody else. I mean, you should learn to recognize that experience and use it. So I send my ER nurse in there to do something to get a temperature, repeat the temp on the kid or something so she can look. And yeah, we decided it was definitely something fishy. So I dropped a dime on the kid. They called the local social worker. There had already been reports and suspicions of abuse. So let's see, how did this play out? Something about the kid. Anyway, we kept him at the ER while social services went and picked up the 2 other kids at the elementary school, and somehow somebody told the mom that I dropped the dime. So anyway, she presented to the ER. I mean, she came to the ER raging and throwing a fit, you know, and everything. And I felt a little unsafe, but you know, 4 kids are safe, so who cares, right? You know, she can be mad at me all she wants. She throw rocks at my car, I don't care. All right, so mandatory reporter, 2 different ways to do it: 405-271-KIDS, and then the 800 number right here. All right, ADHD. She cracked me up with that picture, people. I was just like, she also gave you guys some really super awesome information in here. So I've got a lot of slides in here. If you want to read them just to augment her information, that's great. But I did have a question that I kind of wanted to address. How do you diagnose ADHD? What did she say about how it's diagnosed? Okay, somebody speak up loudly.
DSM-5
has criteria. Who assesses the child for the DSM-5 criteria? A psychologist, a psychiatrist, okay. Basically, it's more than just a handout to the parent, although that is a function of it. There's a handout to the parent, there's a handout that goes to 2 different of the child's teachers, if possible. Now, if they're elementary school, they might only have 1, but these days, the vast majority of elementary schools have their kids rotate classes, or the teachers rotate classes, and they get, you know, instruction by different teachers. Anybody with elementary school kids, are your kids doing that in their school? Is that no, they're not, or no, you don't have kids?
When I was a kid, I don't have kids.
Okay. Shannon, what are your, they what?
They work with the counselor and then with the doctor.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and my son, well, because my son has ADD, and so then he basically goes to a psychiatrist, so we saw 3 different people.
That's exactly right. If you've got a family practice doctor that just hands you a single questionnaire, has you fill it out, and then wants to diagnose your kid ADD or ADHD, I would really, really push back on that. If you've got teachers, especially in kindergarten, that are asking you, have you ever thought about your child being ADHD or ADD? Kindergarten, especially if they've been free-range kids at home, and kindergarten can be a huge adjustment. Kindergarten's usually a little too young for that. To me, to allow for an appropriate diagnosis of ADD or ADHD, you need a survey, you need questionnaires from both parents, mom and dad, at least 2 instructional faculty or teachers at the kid's school, plus most of them will spend a day, a half a day to a full day in psychological testing. So this is not, I mean, it's a diagnosis put on a kid's chart that's going to stay with them the rest of their life. Okay, so do not enter into that lightly. The rest of this, I'm just going to kind of skip through. Defer to Dr. Latassi's for if you have any contradictory facts in here, but otherwise I just kind of wanted to look at it from a clinical point of view of what you do. Okay, because a lot of ADHD issues are really undisciplined issues. Does that make sense? For the 3, 4, and 5-year-old, a lot of them are just, well, I really did kind of grind that one into the ground. Okay. All right. Any questions about anything we've covered so far? Okay, groovy. All right, age-related, eating and feeding disorders are age-related, okay? It might not be, it might not blow your mind to know that you rarely see anorexia before kids become adolescents, okay? And anorexia, by the way, is not gender specific, so it can be male, female, or non-binary. School-aged are often willful eating disorders. They're just flat stubborn, and I don't care how long you make me sit at the table, I am not touching that Brussels sprout. It's all right, because I know eventually you're going to want to go to bed, and you're going to let me go to bed, and that's just willful defiance. And toddlers, a lot of times it's growth dependent. Toddler appetite slump. I spend a lot of time at my 15-month well child checks talking about that. Kids eat when they're hungry. They don't eat because it's noon. They don't eat because, it's dinner time. They eat when they're hungry. And if they're not in a real active growth spurt, 15 to 20 months old, 23, 24 months old, they might not eat much. And then there might be some days where you swear to heavens this child has not consumed enough calories to sustain life. And then there are some days you're like, holy crap, his dad didn't eat that much for dinner last night. So just the thing that I stress to parents is don't make it, pick your battles. How many parents agree with, I know you guys are parents, pick your battles. How many people who were teenagers wish that your parents had done that? Pick your battles, man, because not everything is worth it, okay? And if the kid doesn't want to eat, that's great. But once mom's cooking, we don't do snacks. And it sounds contradictory, but when you've got a kid in an appetite slump, a toddler in an appetite slump, offer them not their favorite foods, because that's how you get a kid that's 6 years old that will only eat mashed potatoes. Oh, they don't even do that anymore. French fries and chicken nuggets, and only from Chick-fil-A. Okay, that's how you get a kid like that. When they're not hungry, very small portions on their plate. Because they sit down and they look at that plate piled with a whole bunch of stuff, they're like, I don't want that anyway. But you give them 4 peas, 3 carrots, 7 chunks of cheese, and 7, chunks of ham or whatever. Well, that's a little more manageable. You can always give them more if they want it. And if they don't eat that, that's fine. But once they get up from the table, eating is over. And the perpetual snack cup drives me insane. It's horrible. I know you guys have talked about this in nutrition. Kids do not need a snack during a frigging hour-long soccer game. I'm sorry, they don't. You do not need snacks just because you're having a social gathering, okay? So, your kid has a regularly scheduled breakfast, regularly scheduled lunch, regularly scheduled dinner. Kids eat what the family has for dinner, all right? So if you make, now admittedly, if you make, what's something that a kid would really, really not want? Huh? Cooked spinach. Well, I was thinking something super spicy. I was thinking something like that.
Curry.
Yeah, something like that. Maybe. I don't know. If you make something that a kid is definitely not going to like, well, you might have an alternative beefed up side dish for the kid. But generally, kids eat what, a lot of times breakfast is just whatever. Lunch is geared towards the kid. If you're in an at-home situation or in a daycare type situation, those are definitely kid variety of horrible food lunches. And then dinner is geared towards the family. So the kid's there for the whole time, that's great. That's it. When they're done, they get up, they're gone. There's no, you can do a scheduled snack in between. Your snacks need to be healthy, like, peanut butter and crackers, something healthy for a snack, not puffs. What is a puff? Nothing. Carbohydrates. Anyway, and then another thing is these kids that walk around with a juice cup all day. Well, you don't have much appetite anyway. Who's been dieting and did the old glass of water before you eat thing? Everybody. Well, guess what a juice cup effectively accomplishes in that 18-month-old? They curb their appetite with their liquids, okay? Can you tell this might be one of my passions? I like the 15-month-old well child check. It's a whole lot of fun. And then infants are often overfed. It's just a problem of the parents. And infants will tell you you're overfeeding them by spitting everything back up at you. Okay? Unfortunately, some parents think, oh my God, they spit up, they must need another 6-ounce bottle. Here's the deal. There's really no reason for a kid to go up to an 8-ounce bottle. If a kid is old enough and big enough to want an 8-ounce bottle, they should probably be eating cheeseburgers. Just saying. So seriously, it's basically an ounce for every hour it's been since they ate last. That's your general rule of thumb. So you got a newborn and they're eating every 2 hours. If you're fixing the bottle, you're going to fix them about 2 ounces. Okay, and you ask parents that come in, oh, my kid spits up all the time. Well, they're 6 weeks old and they're spitting up all the time. And you really sit down and talk to that parent about how they're eating, and they're taking about a 6-ounce bottle every 3 hours. Well, of course they are. Their tummy's not that big. So, all right, anorexia nervosa. It's a really complex biopsychosocial kind of illness. It's defined by the DSM-5. I've got some epidemiology statements there. It's about 0.5% of all girls in the United States are affected by this. And of those affected, of the population, about 10% of them are male. So don't forget about your male patients, okay? They have an intense fear of gaining weight. It's really a body image issue. You guys remember the Carpenters? Yeah, the Carpenters. Oh wow, yay! Somebody's. Your parents played it, right?
My mom loves the Carpenters.
Okay.
So we watched like the movie, when she died and all of that.
She died of anorexia nervosa. Yeah, that's how she died. So I don't like the Carpenters, so I'm not.
It's like my mom's
I
favorite.
just remember them from Why Do Birds? I don't know. But anyway, so yeah, it's a prominent thing, and it's something to not forget about when you've got an underweight 13-year-old in your office. Now, if they're underweight and they're also 4'10", that could just be their. I mean, you gotta look at the parents. That could just be their body habitus, and they might not have any kind of an eating disorder. So a lot of times it's kind of subclinical in our adolescents that come to our clinic. You need to get every history and physical or well child check, which is what we call an annual exam for a child over the age of anything, needs a good feeding history, diet history. How much they exercise. A lot of times they're not really particularly anorexic, however they over-exercise to compensate and burn off the calories that they do eat. Anybody know what a Russell sign is? It's, when you put your finger down your throat, you're eventually going to get a callus from the gastric juices and bile on your finger. So look for a Russell sign. They don't always use their index finger. Look for a third finger or a long finger too. And if their body weight is less than 85% of what should be expected. Next week, Dr. Johnson's coming and doing the well child check, and I've got a ton of stuff that I'm going to put on D2L for you guys to either print, I don't care, or you can save a tree and just look at it as a PDF on your computer. But the body height and weight distributions and the percentiles are all a good part of that. So it's definitely a multidisciplinary approach, medical, they need nutrition, physiological. A lot of times if it's, if they've been dealing with this for a while, they might need an inpatient admission to really get past this. Okay, any questions about any of the eating and feeding disorders? Great. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, like, as a kid, my parents forced me to eat because I wasn't eating.
Yeah.
And they used to say, like, really mean things, like, you're too skinny, it's ugly, you look like a ghost, like, this wasn't healthy. And so I got really upset. I started eating a lot, and within a year, I blew up. I couldn't fit kids' clothes anymore. Like, I felt like I had the acanthosis, tiger hands, because I just was so fat so quick.
Wow.
And I feel like with kids being so obese these days, you kind of don't know what happens in their home.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So do you feel like somebody could have intervened with your family? I mean, did you go to regular well child checks, DM? Do you think that there could have been an intervention by a clinician in your family?
I'm not quite sure. I know, like, at school, they used to check us for, like, body weight and stuff like that, and they told me, like, you're pretty up there, little one. Like, at the time, I was only in the 2nd grade. So I don't think my pediatrician ever said anything. My parents always say, like, well, we just told you to eat. You went overboard and you ate too much. And I'm like, yeah, no way was going to save me. So I'm not quite sure. I think, because all of my siblings were also kind of on the heavier end. And we were always projected to be larger. Since we're Asian, we were projected to be larger than normal for Asians.
Really?
So I think they didn't really notice it happening.
Well, I'm glad to see that you've obviously come to some acceptance to this with your parents up through years of therapy, and you can make sure that when you have children yourself, DM, you say, Mama, you ain't got nothing to do with feeding this kid, okay? All right, so I don't mean to make light of it, but I mean, I hope that you feel like you're okay, you know, to talk to your parents about that. And I also hope that you are aware of, because a lot of times how we're raised is how we inadvertently raise our kids. So I hope that you're aware and won't have this, you know, this in the back of your mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate that. Any other questions about eating disorders or anything like that? Sometimes I think the most common form of child abuse is overweight parents and overweight kids. So a lot of time when I'm dealing with a kid at their 6 or 7 year old well child check and they're heavy, okay, and the parent or the mom or the dad or the, you know, that's with them is heavy also, I try very much to push back and take a family approach to dealing with that. So tell me about tell me about your diet. Tell me what you guys eat. What's it? Okay, this is my question for the school-age child. So, Madeline. I hope there are Madeline in here.
My dog.
Okay. So, Madeline, what if you can have anything you want to eat for dinner tonight? What are you going to ask? Who cooks in your house? Mom, Dad? What are you going to ask Dad to cook tonight? And you know they'll say Chili's, because nobody cooks and they eat out all the time. Or they'll say, you know, mashed potatoes and gravy, and I don't want salad, and you know, so you get a lot about that, just asking that one question, you know. So if it's a situation like that where everybody's heavy, you know, because I deal with it too myself, you know, so I just sit back and say, look, there's some things we can do as a whole family to take a healthier approach to nutrition in your household. Let's think about this. Number one, your child is 6 years old. It's not like my 17-year-old that didn't like what I cooked for dinner and went to Taco Bell instead. You don't have, you know, this is a 6-year-old. They're not eating anything that you're not having in the house. So let's think about what we're bringing into the house. Number two, no seconds on anything white. Okay? That rules out the potatoes, the bread, the rice, the gravy, those empty calorie starches. No seconds. All the seconds you want on the protein, the fruit, and the vegetables, but no seconds on anything white. And let's think about how we can incorporate some extra activity into our day with our kids. Where do we park? Let's not circle the parking lot and take the front row spot. Let's park way to the back and make that be part of our exercise routine. The pediatrician I work for is on the second floor. Did you take the stairs or the elevators up? You know, just those little things, you know, try to do that. So that's one way that I talk, because it's got to be a family approach, and the last thing we want to do is make anybody feel shameful, okay? So, I had one family that they were at my pediatrician's office. They were just a big family, and those kids were big, and they finally were diabetic, both kids, diabetic. And through our counseling and through the encouragement to that family, we saw, over the course of 2 years, we saw the whole family get in better shape. Started going to, you know, they lived in an apartment complex, they didn't feel safe. Well, they found out that because the kids were diabetic, they qualified for a subsidized YMCA membership, you know, and things like that. So we saw that whole, we made a change in that whole family just by not shaming anybody. Because parents know that they've had a rough time with their weight deep down inside, and they really, nobody wants their kid to have a rough time. Do you know what I mean? Be it emotionally or physically, you don't want your kid to have a rough time. Okay, let's talk about pediatric and adolescent depression. This general term includes everything from major depressive disorder to dysthymic disorder to depression associated with bipolar disorder and adjustment depression, which is depressed mood. This is, you guys dealt with depression in behavioral medicine with Dr. Britton. These are basically the same kind of diagnostic criteria. It's got to interfere in functional impairment in relationships, your health, work or school attendance, and your safety, okay? Risk factors unique to pediatric and adolescent situations, a family history of depression, bipolar, suicide, or a first-degree, suicide, especially in a first-degree relative. Prior depressive episodes, a personal history of any anxiety disorders, ADHD, learning difficulties. You know, these kids are depressed because they're not, they get depressed because they know they're not functioning like their peers are. And any adolescent that feels like they don't fit in with their peers is subject to depression and anxiety, okay? There can also be substance abuse, either by the adolescent, him or herself, or by a parent in the home, or a significant other, a parental significant other. I'm trying to be inclusive here, in the home. Anybody lives in the house, okay? If there's a history of trauma or abuse, bullying, or if there's chronic illness, and this includes the illness of obesity, you know, be it whatever, it's still, you know, included there. 40 to 70% of children and adolescents with depression have comorbid psychiatric disorders, ranging from anxiety to substance abuse to eating disorders, physical or sexual abuse. They can, and you know, or some kind of somatization disorder. You know, they're depressed, so they want to go to, you know, they get to the school, they don't want to go to school, they're depressed, they don't want to hang out with their friends, so they have a bellyache, which is the most common somatization disorder. All right, any questions about any of that so far? Great, so there are some awesome screening tools for depression. I put an example of one on this next slide, and I also put it on D2L for you so you could look at it and make it a little more readable. You can find that the Kuchar Adolescent Depression Scale is great. You can find these online. The trick is, can you find the keys to them online? So you can find examples of what the test is, but the key for how to score it is often something that has to be paid for. So you go to a pediatrician's office, and that's just a one-time thing that can be bought and then used. Also, if your pediatrician with whom you're associated, or your supervising physician is a member of the AAPA, or I'm sorry, the AAP, there's a lot of tools available that they can use for free. Most of them are copyrighted, so don't be selling this on the streets, okay? Get me in trouble. All right, a lot of them have better sensitivities and specificities than other. The most important part of these is to make it a routine part of the adolescent-specific of your well child exams beginning at about age 11. And also, don't let the parents fill it out for the kid. You would be surprised at how many will do that. So, is it hot in here?
Yes.
Oh, gosh. Anyway, so you would be surprised at how many parents will fill it out for the kid. That doesn't count, because that's not, I mean, it's pretty obvious, that's not the kid's responses. Let me take a second and turn this off. I can figure it out. And let's make it oscillate. Okay. So, I think I talk loud enough, you guys can still hear me. If you can't, just let me know, and I'll talk louder. So, make sure the kids are filling it out themselves, and do it on a regular basis. If you're seeing a kid for some kind of depressive disorder, have them fill it out every time. And you'll notice changes in it that'll be clinically significant to you. So like I said, there's this teenmentalhealth.org is an amazing resource of these kind of things if you want just some more information for your own edification. Treatment. Initial management of mild depression involves supportive management, and sometimes you act as the therapist. You need to talk to them about availability of resources. On the back of everybody's health insurance card, there's behavioral health information. There's an 800 number, usually most health insurance companies have, where you can call and see what your insurance company's is. There's also a lot of times where you just schedule a lot of pediatricians and a lot of pediatrics PA. They know that the last appointment of every day is going to be their, kind of their, I hate to say depressed kids appointment, but that's going to be their long appointment, where you're not going to stress out if the kid needs to talk an extra 20 minutes. It's not going to throw, that's the last thing you want at a 9:15 appointment. Okay, so that get those in at the end of the day where you've got time. If it depressions or worsens or does not improve in 4 to 6 weeks, if you're not seeing an improvement, sometimes just for somebody to say to that 13-year-old, man, it sounds like you're kind of depressed, let's talk about this, is really all they need. They just need to be heard by somebody, by an adult that they feel like cares about them. Don't be afraid to ask a parent to step out of the room. Can I talk to your kid alone? Okay, that kind of stuff. If there's no improvement in 4 to 6 weeks and you're seeing this kid like every other week or so, you're definitely going to want to consider some kind of pharmacological intervention. Let's see what I say here. Antidepressant use in adolescents and young adults are associated with a slight increased risk of suicidal thoughts and behavior. Can anybody tell me why? I mean, I'm not trying to pimp you guys. I mean, just, what do you think? I mean, what's your gut say? Huh? Go ahead. That's not right.
I think that we learned in behavioral health that they might be so depressed that when they first start feeling a little bit better, they may have a plan but they never feel.
There you go. That's it. There you go. And I explain that to the parents. In or outside of the kid's earshot. And the same is true for any patient that you start on some kind of SSRI or some kind of pharmacological treatment. They might have just been so depressed that they couldn't get up the motivation to actually carry through with their plan. So I mean, I've had suicide anti-pacts with kids. Okay, here's my cell phone number. Call me if you feel like you're going to harm yourself. Here's Teen Talk. Call them if you think you're going to harm yourself. Does anybody, I can't remember the name of it, and I ran out of time, mainly because Dr. Brittany talks a lot in my office. But I ran out of time this morning. I was going to look up the thing. Has anybody heard the story on NPR about when it's this text, this teen text help? Kids that are, has anybody heard about this? Kristen, good. So back me up on this. It's a text. You can text anybody, anywhere, I mean, and you don't know who you're talking to, you volunteer to be, anyway, and they've got all these key words, and they're pooling this data, and they're analyzing what's going on with these people, and not just teenagers, but with these people that are having emotional problems and needing, it's like a text hotline kind of thing. And they can tell you that the most common hour of suicide is 5 a.m. Either they, and stuff like that. It's the amount of data that they're pulling. I'll tell you what, I promise I'll throw in the website and my mop-up and give you that information, because it was definitely a driveway moment when I heard that story. I had to sit through and listen to all of it. I just thought it was fascinating, in the day and age of social media, that we could actually get something, positive out of it. I thought that was pretty awesome. Pre-adolescence, there's very little effectiveness for antidepressant medications, and they've got an especially elevated risk of side effects. So if you've got a pre-adolescent, 7, 8, 9-year-old that's depressed, they definitely need to see a child psychiatrist. Okay, if you feel like they need an antidepressant. Has anybody heard of Calm Waters? Okay, Calm Waters is a free service through Integris, I do believe, for kids going through divorce or that have had the death of a parent. And it is a free group counseling that parents can get their kids involved in. That's definitely a resource that you need to have at your fingertips when you're dealing with the pediatric population. I could always tell when my kids, when one of their friends' parents were going through a divorce, because my kids would get a little clingy. And it's really kind of sad to say, but we saw it with each kid about when they were usually from 8 to 10 years old, when their friends, there'd be a divorce in the class or something. That was always a little sad to me, and they get a little clingy. But Calm Waters can really help that child that's going through that. Okay? All right, premenstrual dysphoric disorder. Yeah, that could be a thing in adolescence too, okay? Not just 20-somethings, okay? So think about that. A low-dose SSRI can be used first line. All right, so that's enough about depression. Anybody have any questions about anything there? Are we starting to think about things from a more pediatric adolescent point of view? Good, good. All right, separation anxiety disorder, pediatric separation anxiety disorder. It's huge. It can be huge, especially with like helicopter parents and everybody knows what I mean by a helicopter parent, right? The ones that are a little overprotective, a little overbearing, absolute control. The kid wanders off to their bedroom, to play for 10 seconds, and mom's down the hallway in there with them saying, "What are you doing?" That's a helicopter parent. It's a style of parenting, I get it. I don't know. Here's the thing. What's your goal as a parent? Ultimately, what is your goal as a parent? That's right. Basically, everything I'm hearing you say says, work yourself out of a job. Who wants to be parenting their 25-year-old, their 27-year-old, their 35-year-old? Who wants to be parenting them? You don't. You'll always be a parent, but you want to work yourself out of a job. And you do that by letting your child display independence. You give them, there's the phrase, just enough rope to hang them. No, you give them just enough leash to fly. You know what I mean? So they're 8 years old, and they want to walk a block down the street. Well, you got a buddy, big sister, sibling? Yeah, go on. Now, you might sit out on that front porch step and watch them all the way down and all the way back. But they did it, right? That's helicopter parenting, and kind of the antithesis of that is free-range parenting. Anybody heard anything about that lately? Well, it made the news about a year ago. My NPR fans might have heard it, but there was a kid that was picked up by Child Protective Services at 10 years old, riding the bus alone in New York City. Now, how do you feel about that? Well, it just depends on who you are and what your parenting technique is, right? Now, you know, I think either situation can go to the extreme. But if I've got, you know, a 10-year-old that I feel like, my kids were 10, 11, 8, 9 years old, and they rode their bicycles down from our house in the Paseo to the Nordic Library. They said their trip there was a lot more fun than the uphill trip back. But, you know, they would do it twice a week and go to the library, and I let them. Because they were together, they were a gang, they were a group, and, you know, I felt safe doing that. So I think that if you're in a situation where you feel like your child is safe, now you're going to definitely test this. You know, you live in New York and your kid walks four blocks to school by themselves at, you know, 8 years old. You know, are you going to let them do it? Depends on your kid, depends on your situation, depends on which 4 blocks. I can guarantee you that before that mom let that 10-year-old ride that bus by themselves, that somebody she knew was on the back of that bus when that kid got on and stayed on that bus until that kid got off several times. You know what I mean? So it's just things to think about. Kids used to have, when I was a kid, you got kicked out in the morning and you had to be home, well, I had to be home before dusk. I ran all over North Edmond. I hitchhiked all over North Edmond. I mean, I was a little bit ornery. But, you know, I mean, but even before I was too old to, you know, I wasn't old enough to hitchhike, I was still all over. There were wild hogs living over here on the Snyder's place. I'd flip rocks and find, you know, snakes underneath rocks at the pond and stuff. And my mom didn't worry about me. Now, why was that? Did she think that there weren't pedophiles in the 1960s? Heck no, there were pedophiles in the 60s, but people just had more of a sense of allowing their children some independence. Now, I think there's a happy medium between free-range parenting and helicopter parenting. And a lot of it is educating your parents, or educating the parents of your patients so that they can recognize when their child needs independence. You know, because basically by the time your kid's 12, 13 years old, you're not going to instill a value, teach a moral, or develop a character trait that's not already there. Does that make sense? So by the time your kid's 14, 15 years old, they should have some independence, a little freedom. They want to go hang out somewhere after school for an hour, and they're home by their curfew, great. They want to go hang out somewhere after school for an hour and they show up 2 hours late? Well, they just proved they weren't quite ready for that little bit of independence and privilege. Does that make sense? Okay. So, separation anxiety disorder. I kind of went off on a tangent, sorry about that. Basically, it's a greatly, I mean, every kid, I can remember crying when my mom was gone too long. I can remember that, sitting in the window in the front hall. My mom, it was Fridays, you know, we had a she was supposed to be the housekeeper, but we all had to clean house before she actually came the night before, so she was really just a babysitter. She was really just a nanny that came and hung out with us. So our goal was to terrorize her, you know, and stuff like that. And I put snakes in the flower pots and stuff for her to find. But anyway, so my mom would say, I'll be home at 3. And it would be 4 o'clock and she wouldn't be home. And I can remember being, you know, 4 or 5 years old and being really sad. My mom wasn't there when she was supposed to be. That's kind of normal separation anxiety. At least I hope it, I think it is. But separation anxiety disorder is definitely that to the nth. Okay? So there's a little bit of a genetic predisposition. It's basically, you know how stranger anxiety develops around 9 months old. We haven't really talked about that, but we will. If they have stranger anxiety at 3 months old, that child is more likely to develop a separation anxiety disorder. It's when a kid really just loses it when they're not with their parents. Okay, has anybody seen a kid like that? I think most of us have. And it often is a factor of how the increased parental anxiety about the child can be a factor in that. So you might see it in a first child, but not so much in the second child. Because moms, have you ever seen the commercial where they're bathing the baby, the new parents are bathing the newborn, and they drop the phone in the water and everything, and then by the time they get to the second kid, mom just opens the shower door and throws the kid in with dad. Yeah, that's that's more reality than fiction. So, but the parents mellow for the second and third kid, so you rarely have a separation anxiety disorder with a kid, what am I trying to say, like a fourth or fifth kid, and it's more prominent in only children too. Okay, so what makes it a separation anxiety disorder other than just typical separation anxiety? Persistent and excessive worrying about losing or possibly harm befalling their attachment figure, whether it's the parent or whatever. When they think about going, when they think about the parent being gone, they can have the same reaction, okay? Persistent excessive worrying that something will happen that will lead to separation, like if they get lost or they get kidnapped, they're worried about that kind of stuff. Refusal to go to school is where we see it quite a bit, or elsewhere because of fear of separation. Persistent and excessive fearful or reluctant to be alone without major attachment figures or without significant adults, without some kind of significant adult in the setting. So they don't freak out when grandma's babysitting them, but they can't have, you know, Aunt Lizzie. So that just is, Aunt Lizzie just thinks the kid doesn't like her, right? Okay. So, duration of the disturbance, it's got to be at least 4 weeks long. I mean, because every kids will go through phases where they just don't want their parents to leave, okay, and that's normal. But this has got to be persistent. It's got to start before the age of 18. If you have a separation anxiety that starts after age 18, you're just weird. I don't know what else to say. Disturbance causes clinically significant distress or impairment in social, academic, or other important areas. In other words, they're unable to function because of this. They're having repeated nightmares. They're having repeated complaints of physical symptoms. They're making up an excuse to not be separated and to make their mom stay home from work with them or whatever, or not have to go to daycare. Okay? They don't want to go to sleep without being near their, I mean, everybody's heard of the family bed. That's kind of a thing, and I'm neither here nor there, but, you know, I encourage my parents to have and we did too. I mean, our closed bedroom doors, our sanctuary, our oasis, you knock, you don't come in. And I had many a kid that wake up with a nightmare that slept on the floor beside my bed. Okay, maybe I'm mean, but that's what my mom did to me. You know, so that's what I did to them. I gave them a nice little pallet, gave them a pillow, they could sleep on the floor. Okay, so history. All of this is diagnosed by history. There's really not a questionnaire or anything. But ask if the child is do they have nightmares about separation? You know, ask the parents if sleep is impacted. Is school impacted? Do they refuse to go to school? Has the school, do they call home sick after they get to school? Do they call home sick? How long has it lasted? And was there some kind of a possible stressor? I mean, you and your spouse get divorced when your kid is 4, you know, they might develop a separation anxiety disorder. I can kind of understand that. They felt abandoned by whichever parent left the home. So there's often some kind of a precursor or a stressor. Nothing on physical exam, there's nothing out of the order. Not a zilch on diagnostic tests. You can't go pull a SAD, you know, hormone, whatever, you know, not going to work. But there are a few scales, but really this is a diagnosis by history. So we need to make sure that we understand what else it could be and not just focus in on one thing. So that's why in our mind we always come up with a differential. Could it be just a generalized anxiety disorder? And mom's really, this affects her the most, so she's not seeing some of the other anxieties, okay? Is it a social anxiety? Are they afraid of being out in public and going to school? You know, I mean, that's got to be considered, you know, that's got to be considered. Do they just, you know, do they have an anxiety about eating in public? Some people are really weird about that, you know, and is this a manifestation of that? Do they have some kind of specific phobia? you know, kids don't always recognize fear as fear. You know, they don't always recognize fear, and sometimes they translate fear into anger. Adults are really good at that sometimes, but kids are especially good at that. So how do we treat this? Caregiver education. You know, you talk to your parents about don't prolong the goodbye. You don't need 30 kisses and blowing kisses out the door and hugs and running back in from the car for one more kiss. You know, we don't do that. You know, you be brief, you say what you're going to do, and you do it. Let your child know when you'll be back. You know, don't tell me you'll be home at 3 and get there at 4:15 because you're going to make me cry. You know, don't let the child, because a lot of times moms have a lot of anxiety about this themselves, because they don't want to leave their kid. They don't want to see their kid that upset. You know, so they're willing to sacrifice their own well-being. Believe me, Mom, you need that lunch on Friday with your girlfriends. This kid is going to be fine at Mother's Day out. Don't let the kids see that you're upset, okay? And then don't overdo the reunion. Oh my gosh, I missed you so much. Well, if you were gone for 2 weeks, maybe you should, but you know, not if you're just gone for 2 hours for lunch with the girlfriends or whatever. If you've got a child that's really dealing with some issues, then start with smaller separations, use incentives and positive reinforcements for success, okay? As a pediatrics PA, I'm a huge fan of sticker charts, okay? So, you use a sticker chart for anything, okay? So, here's the deal. All right, Johnny, Mom's going to go. I've got to go to the grocery store. You're going to stay with Dad. I know you don't like it when Mom leaves, but I'm leaving and I will be back in 45 minutes. Okay, so you're gone for just a little time. I come back and Dad says that you didn't throw a temper fit while I was gone. You're going to get a sticker. And so here's the beauty of sticker charts. You make them yourselves. So when you're first introducing it, you might only put 4 squares. Now this sounds so silly, but people don't think about this. You might only put 4 squares on that piece of paper. You, Johnny, by the end of next week, if you get a sticker in all 4 squares, we're going to do something fun, okay? And your reward should never involve candy or food, okay? Remember my slides we talked about earlier. It can be an extra story at bedtime. That's a big one. It can be an extra 15 minutes when you go to the park. Even though you've been at the park for 10 minutes, you say, okay, Johnny, here comes your extra 15 minutes. Okay, so you know, seriously. As they get older, you can let them earn points that they can cash in on things. Maybe they can cash in 30 points. You decide how they earn them, but maybe they can cash in 30 points and buy a chore pass for a day or a week. Or they can cash in 50 points and buy 15 extra minutes on the gaming system on Saturday morning. Okay, so you know, it's just it's simple. I'm a big fan of incentives and positives rather than negative reinforcement. Okay, because a lot of times all the kid really wants is your attention. They'll take it negatively, positively, they'll take your attention, you know. All right, and then you build up to those larger separations, okay? What do we got coming up next? Social anxiety disorder. Okay, so this is, you can read the specifics here, but basically a kid has a social anxiety. School, oh my God, school is like, you could not pay me to go back to middle school. You could not pay me to do that, even if you morphed me into my middle school body. I might try harder not to turn into this, but you could not pay me to go back to middle school, I'm telling you. So social anxieties can manifest around that. Now we're not talking about, oh my gosh, do they still do Sadie Hawkins dance? I don't know, but it's the sock hop. It's the 5th grade sock hop in the cafeteria Friday. Mom, I don't think I can take it. That's not a social anxiety disorder. That's a normal 5th grade anxiety, okay? There's usually not any kind of precursor. So if a kid, let me think of something really silly. But let's say a kid is in a social situation and does something incredibly embarrassing, like, you know, they go to Brahms and they spill their entire root beer float on their lap. Well, they might get a little anxious the next time they go to Brahms, and that's to be understandable, okay? Does that make sense? So there's some, it's got to last about 6 months or so. I really went into the nuts and bolts of this. I don't feel like talking about it right now. So, but about 7% of kids suffer from a social anxiety disorder, and no shocker, is higher in girls. The prevalence is higher in girls than boys. Okay? Any questions about those? I think I've got another anxiety. Oh, the diagnosis is history dependent. Distress can be manifested by physical symptoms such as blushing, palpitation, trembling, GI upset, diarrhea. If you've got a kid that's dealing with this and that you know that they're going to have diarrhea on oral book report day, you might send a private note to the teacher, although I don't think they send notes anymore. I think you just text the teacher these days. Anyway, and just let them know, hey, you know, if Mary Sue needs to go to the bathroom, would you please let her? She'll probably be fine after the book report. You know, so you might just give them a heads up about that. Younger children often exhibit periods of selective mutism in social situations while having the ability to talk freely at home. It's a true thing. I had a patient that I did not hear speak a word until she was 8. And then she wouldn't shut up. And she came to my office. But until that child was 8, she would not speak to me, would not speak to me. And I thought she was just the weirdest kid. But Mom would tell me, no, she's, you know, I swear she talks all the time. Her siblings, yeah, she talks all the time. Anyway, so that could be a form of a social anxiety disorder. Did somebody have a question? No?
Oh, I said that was like Donkey off the Shrek.
Oh,
The old
really?
lady. Have you ever seen Shrek?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of which kid I watched that with. I don't remember the details. Has anybody seen Coco?
Yes.
Oh my God! Did you cry like a big fat baby at the end? Me too! I thought that was the saddest movie ever. Paul and I literally, like 2 months ago, Amazon Primed it or whatever, and watched Coco, and I was just like, this is ridiculous, and this is what my 5-year-old, adopted grandkid wants to watch every time he comes over. I'm like, no, you're not watching that sad stuff. Let's find you something happy like Rugrats. Anybody seen Rugrats?
Oh, yes.
Rugrats are the bomb. Okay, so symptoms. Hey, you guys, I went a whole hour. Do you want a break? How many slides do I have left? Oh, I got suicide. Yeah, take a break. Let's take a break.